Welcome to Hot Takes, Holy Grounds, a podcast by Chalice Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Gilbert, Arizona. Chalice is an open and affirming church where questions matter as much as answers, a church where we are called by God to be welcoming, extravagantly, are unapologetically progressive, and we seek God's justice in the world. I'm Pastor Jay. I'm the pastor of Chalice Christian Church, and today I have with me three Chalice members, all of whom attended General Assembly 2025 in Memphis, Tennessee. And today we're going to be talking about that experience for all of us. So I'm going to invite each of you all to introduce yourselves, what's your role at the church, and we'll go around.
Hello, my name is Jerry Johnson. I am a Sagittarian, so my role at the church is whatever is needed in the church. I've been property manager and work with anybody who needs help whenever they ask.
That's for you, Lee.
Hi, I'm Cecilia Johnson, and I also do whatever is asked. Former moderator of Chalice Christian Church and a lifelong third-generation Disciples of Christ.
I'm Jim Barton. I'm a elder at Chalice Christian Church, and I'm a Capricorn, but I don't know what that means. And so also a frequent host of the podcast that we're re-upping. So
Also, so before we get going, there's one little side note that Chalice as a church is very small, and yet for some reason we've had 2 sessions of general board members, which means national level board of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, as a part of our congregation, and they're both here with us. Cecilia is coming off of the general board, and Jim is stepping onto the general board, and so it's really cool that our little church has such a strong presence with the denomination. And so I'm really thankful for your all's work in the denomination and for all that you all have done in the past, both for the general church, the regional church, and for Chalice. So thank you all so much for doing all that you've done for the church. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the General Assembly of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Now, if you've never heard of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ before, or you're new to us, or just curious about how we gather as a wider church, I want to introduce you to one of the most important events that we do in our shared life together. It's called General Assembly. General Assembly is that national gathering of our whole church. We hold it every 2 years. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes, where members from all over the United States and Canada come together for worship, learning, business, fellowship, discernment of what's next. It's one of the few times when disciples from every corner of the denomination, lay, pastors, regional bodies, and the general minister leaders are all in the same place at the same time, united in Christ's Spirit, seeking the Spirit of God's Spirit, God's guidance for our collective future. So General Assembly goes back to the 20th century. It starts with the design of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, which took place in 1968. But gatherings like General Assembly have taken place since way before the design of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, all the way back to our foundation as the Stone Campbell movement. But in 1968, we restructured as a denomination, and we created the General Assembly, and that became our main legislative body as a church. So we have representations from congregations, from regions, along with general ministries. We all get together to decide what it is that our church has, what God is calling our church to next. So a lot of things happen at Assembly, including worship, which is awesome. We find workshops and learning tracks to where we can learn about how to be a better church and how to grow. We also do business sessions, not just talking about budgets and things like that, but we talk about what it is that we as a denomination affirm and where it is that we think God is calling us next. There's also exhibits and networking, and what it is best at being a family reunion for disciples. That is what it is at best, a big, gigantic family reunion. So, with all of that being said, I'd like for us to talk about what happened this year at 2025 Assembly. So let's start with some of the business items that we had. Cecilia, would you like to start with talking about the business changes that we're going to be making to the General Assembly coming up?
Sure, be happy to do that. The interesting part, as Jay said, was that we have a design. We don't have a constitution. We don't have laws. We have a design, and so it's very nimble, and it changes at the will of the people, because we are very much a lay group of people. Oftentimes, we call ourselves not a denomination; we call ourselves a movement.
That's right.
Movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. It's very important for us. As far as business, probably the biggest change has to do with how we gather. Back in the day, of course, you had horse and buggies, and you just drove to the local little house church gathering. And now we're all over the United States and Canada, so being able to physically get together is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
We had a biennial meeting. We are now turning into what's called a triennium. So we are going to now be meeting every year instead of every 2 years, and every third year we're going to meet in person. So we're going to meet virtually for the general meeting. The other big change I think that really will help our denomination is we don't have to wait until the annual meeting or the triennium to make decisions or to make statements really about what's going on in our world and what our faith and our purpose requires of us. So we can actually call special meetings anytime. The other change that is happening is in our representation. Because we're so much a lay congregation, oftentimes rural congregations, every congregation gets 3 votes now, not based on size of membership in your church, but every person gets 3 votes, which is about 6,000 people that can vote on an annual basis.
Yeah.
So those are really the 2 big changes.
One of the changes that I'm excited about there, I love that we gather every 2 years, because you just see your friends every 2 years. You get that check-in, and I'm going to lament in missing that. But also, one of my frustrations with General Assembly is that sometimes we have sense of assembly resolutions that come up that are pretty far in the past at this point. It could be something that happened right at the end of the last General Assembly, and it could be 2 years later that we finally have a resolution to say, yeah, we approve of that or we disapprove of that. And so with the new movement towards a virtual gatherings annually, or being able to gather for special sessions online virtually, we're going to be able to have responses to things in a timely manner, so that we can have a response to some of the things that are happening, so that we can have an identity around those things. I'm excited about those changes. Not excited about not seeing everyone in person, but there's good things to come from this. Thank you, Cecilia. Does anyone else have any thoughts on the change in business? No? 2515, which I did not write down. Do you remember what that one was listed? I believe that this was the emergency resolution. Let me see. The emergency resolution for there were 2 emergency resolutions.
2515 is opposing Project 2025 and other policies.
Yeah. So this 2515 opposes Project 20, or was a resolution to oppose Project 2025. And like I said, had we had an answer before, November elections, maybe that would have had a different outcome for us. So hopefully that's what one of these things of us being able to gather more frequently will solve. But we as a denomination came out on a couple of different fronts this last assembly, talking about things that are happening in the political world and how we as a church can respond to them. This was one of them. We also had a couple emergency resolutions, which means they came up after we were able to get them all together, and we were still able to vote on them. But the thing that I heard most from these resolutions, not just that we oppose things that are happening nationally, because it's obvious that we should be opposing things like Project 2025, opposing the genocide in Gaza, opposing the way that we're treating our immigrants. We had resolutions talking about all of these things. But one of the things that, and we can go down the rabbit hole of talking about why these things are all evil and bad and not good for the world. But as a church, one of the things I found really exciting in these resolutions was when it was time for a conversation as a church, In a room of 1,000+ people, you can get up in the microphone, share your peace of mind, and have everyone hear you. On several of these occasions, we had young folks from our church, not just teenagers, but young adults, get up and talk about these issues. And I was excited about it, not just because there were young people at assembly doing assembly things and not just running around like chickens with their heads cut off like they sometimes do. And that's fun too. And I love that and I affirm that. But they were participating in the life, in the business of our church. And there could be nothing more exciting to me than that. And one of them even said, if we really want to know what young people are caring about, these issues that we're talking about today, these are what young people care about. And if we want to grow, if we want to reach young people, we have to talk about those tough issues that we're talking about.
There was, when you talk about having people come up to the mic, there was a woman that really made an impression on me. She got up and she said that she decided to join our movement because she was previously, what her words, a Christian nationalist, and she has a son who is transgender. And she said that was not accepted in her traditional church at the time, and found our denomination that said, this is where I felt comfortable. This is where I felt that God was leading me, and was also seeking what Jesus has said when it comes to love. Interestingly enough, she also mentioned the importance of us being inclusive. And Dr. William Barber, in one of his sermons, he had said, we don't like to be called a denomination because we are inclusive. And denomination implies that everybody believes the same and you're exclusive to what you believe. And that really stuck in my mind that Dr. Barber had said.
I actually had my disciples history professor, Dr. Scott C. at Christian Theological Seminary, would mark you down for points on any of your grades if you called the Disciples of Christ a denomination. You could have said that we have our denominational structure, but if you called us a denomination, he would mark you down. He would say, no, we are a movement.
Wow.
And so it's good to hear that language spoken at General Assembly,
Yes.
Because it really is important that we're not a denomination. We may look and feel like a denomination, but it's different because we are a movement. It's exactly as you said, we're not lockstep in our beliefs. We're not telling each other how to believe or what to believe, but rather we're walking with each other and trying to figure out how to believe together. And we're walking together, so that makes us a movement as opposed to a denomination where it says, you get in line here and this is how you believe now. So
When I grew up early, several decades ago, I remember my mother saying, and a lot of the people in our church at the time said, no creed but Christ.
That's right. Yeah.
And I loved that as a kid. It really impressed me that if you're following Jesus' teachings, then you're following the right way. And I love that about our denomination, that it's not a whole bunch we have to memorize or learn. It's no creed but Christ.
I am of this group, definitely, even in our small congregation, one of the newest people to the Disciples of Christ. And what brought me to the Disciples of Christ is that I think the idea of the movement, it is constantly changing to adjust to what's going on in the world. That's where we come with the opposition to some of the restrictive things that are going on in our society today. And in the assembly, which I was calling a conference, and my wife directed me into an assembly, that everyone had the opportunity to express their opinion to channel the direction of the movement. So that was something that really impressed me up close and personal at the assembly.
I think you could see at the assembly sort of on full display the benefits and problems with disciples polity.
Yeah.
So one thing about it is good that everyone gets to speak, and it is good that we don't tell people what to believe.
Right.
even so, for example, Chalice was a sponsor of a resolution since the assembly called General Resolution 1327, which was encouraging all manifestations of the church to become welcoming and affirming.
That's right.
Now, what's interesting is that passed. I'll point out, though, back in 2013, that passed, but there was substantial opposition. It was about 1/3, 2/3. But even, and it was not actually compelling. It didn't cast. It didn't say, "Oh, now all churches and all disciples' churches are open and affirming."
Right.
It was the sense of assembly to encourage it. So that's interesting, right? Like that's an interesting path. So trace back from that, I got to meet Michael Kinnaman at the assembly.
I was hoping someone would bring up Michael Kinnaman.
And he's a hero to me because he was up for president and general minister and was not elected because of his tolerance for LGBTQ. At the time, gay people, because it was in the 80s, I think late 70s, early 80s, something like 79, 81.
Yeah, maybe.
And so, so he was actually, all right, now here's the thing. The folks who were upset about that pointed out that it seemed that a bunch of anti-gay folks were bused to the assembly in Oklahoma City so they could vote against him, so they could block him. All right, well, that's unfortunate. We had somebody come to the mic, I didn't know if you were going to talk about her, who said that the last time she had come to the mic, she'd had a bad experience. And she was talking about asking us to stand up against genocide in the Gaza situation, right? Well, a previous assembly, she had made a similar comment and had been accused of being an outsider. And so they were busing in liberals to sort of push this liberal agenda. Now, it's interesting to me that all of the humanitarian resolutions passed pretty much without opposition.
I didn't hear. Maybe heard a murmur of a nay somewhere.
But I hope that's evidence of the fact that what we were trying to do as the disciples, which is we don't tell you what to believe, we move you what to believe. Mm-hmm. Maybe we go from Michael Kinnaman not becoming general president to GA 1327 passing by a 2/3 to 1/3 to last time we had a trans welcoming of trans people that I think passed unanimously. And so maybe we have brought some people along, and maybe there is a story there about the value of working with people, of sticking with it, of plugging away. Right. Although we need to be honest too, part of what happens there is other people left.
Yes.
Right. At some point we outlasted them. And I don't know. I mean, I'm a lawyer by trade, and so there's a combative nature of me that says maybe that's okay. But anyway, I just want to point out that it is. I really feel like this assembly, we really saw. I mean, the good news is we don't. Even if they left, we didn't tell them to go. They left.
Self-selected.
Okay, well, then they made their choice. We were like, we're still going to listen. So that's a good thing about it. It takes an awful long time. I can tell you in 2013, we had pins that said discern already, because a number of times resolutions have been passed that the church would discern over LGBTQ justice. And so we had these pins that said discern already. And so that's a little bit of the downside of the disciples' polity. So.
Is that it's very slow. Yeah. Yes.
You know, when you're talking about the experiences we have at General Assembly, I think there's 2 or 3 what I would call cornerstones of our belief in. I know Jerry's going to talk about one, and that's justice. Yeah, it's huge for our church. So I know he's very passionate about a speaker that he went to. The other one is staying at the table. Being who we say we are. And we are the only, quote, mainline denomination that has communion around the Lord's table every Sunday. And so that's a huge emphasis of who we are, because it reminds us of who we are, what we are to be, and what we are to do. And then the other cornerstone that permeated the assembly is mission work. And that's also a very important piece from the beginnings in the 19th century of mission is important. And I'm going to talk about that later in some of the reports.
In fact, what drew congregations together to form what would become the Christian Church Disciples of Christ was missions, was doing missions together, was doing global missions, doing missionary work around the world at the time is what they called it. Missionary work. We don't call them global. We call them global mission volunteers now. They're not missionaries, but doing that work together is what drew us together as a denomination in the first place. So the other thing that we do at Assembly is we do workshops and learning tracks. And I know Jerry's got one that he'd really like to talk about, so I'm going to give him the mic.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we've been talking about justice. We've been talking about the law. We've been talking about discernment and bringing people along. Well, this book called Confessions of a Former Prosecutor. Preston Shipp was the person who wrote the book, and that's he wasn't only a former prosecutor, he was Assistant Attorney General of the state of Tennessee. So he had invested his life into the prosecution side of law. And he had an epiphany in his life where he was brought face to face with a decision that he had made, had no qualms about, had no questions about, but came to understand the person who he had judged and sent to prison for basically their life. It was a 16-year-old young lady who was sent to prison for mandatory 51-year sentence that he found out later on the circumstances around the situation and changed from being a prosecutor to being an advocate for the justice system. And it was a big, I think, positive process for me to hear that, because my understanding of the law, as you can tell, I'm a black man coming up in the U.S., and I've always had questions about the law, right and wrong, and the law. As you know, it used to be the law that women couldn't vote. It used to be the law that slavery was legal. So as the law changes and evolves, we come to understand a little better what the reality of right and wrong is, hopefully, because we see going on nowadays, we're seeing a lot of things that are becoming law or even acceptable are not what would be the things that Jesus would do or what the right thing to do is. So I recommend, again, Confessions of a Former Prosecutor, if you want to know more about his journey, because it was a long journey. Like I say, he grew up with the idea of the law being always correct and coming to understand that there is a difference between the law and right and wrong.
Thank you, Jerry. There were lots of was probably one of the most impactful of the workshops that we had, as far as being moved by someone's story. And there were other workshops that talked about how to better serve our congregations, how to better welcome our communities into our congregations. One I went to was about how you can incorporate neurodivergency into worship. So folks who maybe have autism, or folks like me who have ADHD, how can you incorporate things into worship so that those neurodivergents can connect with their neurodivergency, as opposed to expecting them to fit into the model that we have laid out for them? Because for me, like, if I'm sitting in worship, I like to fiddle and do things. And so, this morning in worship, we had coloring sheets and we had, notes, things like that. Last week, I encouraged people to pay attention to their senses. And so that's what I took from Assembly was making sure that we're encouraging a multi-sensory worship experience in the best way that we can. And it doesn't mean that we're going to have, turn the lights off and make the room cold or something weird like that. But call attention to the fact that not everyone can just sit still for an hour and be okay with it.
Yeah.
Did y'all attend a workshop that was interesting?
I attended the one that was put on by Arizona folks about the border.
Yes.
And that was good. Kelly was there and presented.
Shout out my wife.
Yeah, that's right. And then Ayelsa presented. We also had someone talking about the Center for Mercy. I was trying to look it up. I can't. It's like Miseria. I can't say. It has the same. It has the same root as miserable.
Yeah.
So it's interesting in Latin.
Misericordia.
Misericordia, thank you. Yeah, Misericordia.
Casa Misericordia.
And it was, that to me was very interesting because it was, like you said, you mentioned Cecilia and Jerry about justice and about like doing work, like actual work. And it was funny because some of what the woman who ran that Misericordia Center talked about was, sometimes they talked about difficult issues when people would come, refugees, and maybe one of the refugees was the abuser, or maybe one of the refugees was the abused, and how they, it's funny because it reminded me of the toughness that goes along with mercy. Like mercy sometimes can be thought of as like a soft thing. And it reminded us that no, mercy requires strength and toughness. And it was in the context of a very real hands-on. So that really stuck with me.
And also a part of the assembly is what I consider the most boring part of assembly is the reports. I mean, so many churches now have moved to a model where we email out the reports so that everyone can read them beforehand, and we just get in the meeting and we say, does anyone have any questions about the report that you should have read before the meeting? And then, but we get these big, now at assembly, these are much larger reports for larger ministries. And so they do deserve our attention because these people do a lot of work on behalf of our church. And they're always big and beautiful reports with PowerPoints and things like that make it feel alive. And so one of the things that I really appreciate is just how they share the good news of what they're doing in the denomination on our behalf. Cecilia, did you have any ones that you wanted to highlight?
Sure, I'd like to talk about them. I think what's interesting is there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, giving to the national church, what they use with, how they use the money from there. We actually have 79 different ministries in our movement, which is just unbelievable. So I'm just going to highlight a couple. One that I really like is that we have our own publishing company called Chalice Press, although it's changing now to Chalice Media Group. And I encourage everybody to go and just Google Chalice Press and look at the plethora of books. We got to have a bookstore, which Jerry and I both got lost a couple times, just literally looking and reading at all the different books. So that's really cool. And I as a lifelong educator, I encourage people to continue reading and growing in their knowledge. So that was a big one for me. We had a report from Church Extension Fund, which is, we have our own sort of, I call them our own loan officer, our own internal way to be able to borrow and fund our churches, our buildings, and that sort of thing. And we at Chalice just experienced that. We got a loan to buy our church. We decided it was overburdening us, and so we just sold our church actually last week, our actual building, and now we meet currently at the recreational center, Freestone Recreational Center in Gilbert, Arizona. We have a historical society, and educator, I'm always pushing that. We can't know where we're going if we don't know where we've been.
Yeah.
So that's a very, very cool thing.
I say this in all lovingness, but if you want to find a good group of church nerds, you'll go to the Disciple Historical Society because that's where they all hang out.
Oh yeah,
It's
totally.
It's a good group of folks.
Totally. We're building a new library and have a new archivist that's preserving our original documents. It's very cool. We have specific groups, which is really great. We have the Black Union.
Yeah.
We have the Obra Hispana, and we have the NAPAD, which is the North American Pacific Islanders.
Yeah, NAPAD, yeah.
In Asian. And it's really...
I think it's Native American Pacific.
Oh, Native American. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
It's okay.
Acronyms.
You have a mic in front of you. It makes it harder to think.
Yeah.
It's magic. I don't know how it happens.
Yeah. Well, I get the NAPAD because I'm
Yeah.
used to just saying the acronyms. Yeah. So we had reports from all those different groups, and I love that part because we have this unity of purpose and belief, but we also have individual needs and cultural needs that we honor and respect and support in our denomination. So that's really cool. I want to talk a little bit about our Disciples Home missions.
Okay.
we have an offering called Week of Compassion that
Yes.
our denominations, each of our congregations donate money, and they are so totally active.
Yeah.
While we were there was the Texas floods, which was awful of that deal. Our denomination was there sending money, supporting a church down there, sending people down to support. So I think that's really important to talk about. And then we also have a Disciples Men's, Disciple Women's group, and the Disciple Women's group has gotten very involved in the Arizona Border Project and have taken the trip down to Nogales. And they actually have a watering spot in the desert, and they're getting ready to start a new watering spot in the desert.
Okay.
So I thought those are, I'm a nerd when it comes to reports and learning what everybody's doing. And I loved that we had lots of really great highlights of what's going on that we don't often know about, for sure.
Thanks, Cecilia. And then there's two other things I want us to talk about today, and the second to last is the worship experience at Assembly. Worship at Assembly is always very different than what worship is in our home congregations. Maybe it's because we are able to gather our best instrumentalists, our most charismatic leaders to lead worship music, and that's always very moving and very powerful. But I always hear a new song that at Assembly that I want to bring back to and play. Don't worry, I heard two that we're going to be singing, so I've already told Kelly what we're going to do, so we're very excited about that. But the preaching at Assembly is always top notch. It's I missed Dr. King's sermon on Saturday night.
I have some things
But
about that.
I would love for someone to talk about who spoke on Saturday night and why it was so important where we were.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Dr. Bernice King because I was so impressed with her. One thing that our denomination, she's not a Disciples of Christ, and so I remember our general minister and president Terry Owen saying that when she was talking to Dr. King about coming and speaking, she said, well, why do you say you're Christian? Because that sounds so elitist, like you're the only Christians. And she said, we are not, Terry's response was, we are not the only Christians. We're Christian only.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of hard for Dr. King to understand about our denomination. It was very cool, though, for her to come and talk. And I have to say, by the way, she is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter. She was 3 years old when he was killed, and actually in Memphis where we were.
Yeah.
So she had a couple of rough moments as she was reliving being in the town where her father was murdered, and so that was very powerful to me. But she talked about having hope, having faith, and power. And oftentimes we think we don't have any power. And so she really focused on that. And then she said a phrase, God doesn't have guardrails. And I love that statement because, we compartmentalize things, and that doesn't fit in our beliefs. And then she talked about the power of the Holy Spirit. And oftentimes we don't talk about the power of the Holy Spirit because when Jesus left this earth and the Holy Spirit came down for us, we have God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, the tri belief. And so one other thing she said is we have to get rid of this self-centeredness. We're kind of in that sort of a cultural mode of everybody for themselves.
Yeah.
And she said that you need to get yourself out of the way and move together. So that was really powerful. And then I just want to highlight another one of our speakers, Reverend Kirk. And he did an analogy about our unity, which I love that piece. And he was in a running club, and he says, we've been together for years. Why do they stay together? They're a diverse group of people. They do all kinds of different careers, family situations, ethnicity, all of that. But what keeps them coming back? And he said it's a single focus. And he said that he used that analogy to say that our movement is very much like that. We are very diverse, very open, accepting, and affirming because we have a single focus. Being the church we say we are as followers of Jesus Christ. So really those were the two highlights to me of the sermons.
I think picking up on some of what Dr. King talked about, she talked about us being a vehicle of God. And it's very interesting because she talked about how in the passage from, I think it was from Ephesians, or I think it was Ephesians, basically talking about God has power in the same way you have power. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting because it sort of started to kind of, I was like, oh, is she doing a little process theology? What's happening right now? But it was very interesting because she was like, you are empowered to be a vessel of God. So it wasn't a surrender everything to God and let God do it. It was like you are doing it. God has power in as much as you have power. So it was that we are empowered, like you said, and then also we're powered to be the hands and feet of God. I think it was very, very impactful. The other thing she did say that was interesting, that was, it's funny. You hear things that there's this idea of give it up to God, which I recoil from, right? But I heard it in a context from her that made a lot of sense. She talked about you have to care without carrying. Yeah. And so what she said was, when you're in the face of this injustice, we have to still care. You can't look away. You have to care. But you can't carry the burden of thinking that you have to make the change. Right. You can't carry the burden of all that you give up to God. Yeah. So I thought that was very interesting that you give up the maybe guilt, you give up maybe the anxiety, you give up the stress of it. You transfer that to God. You still care, and then you combine it with the other thing. Then you still do the work. And it was interesting because that to me was this very empowering message that came out of. Sometimes give it up to God can be like throw your hands in the air and not be an actor. And it was very much not that. And I thought that was very fascinating. Active to give it up to God. It's very active. She also did something interesting. I always like it when a preacher challenges you in a way. She talked very much about a personified Holy Spirit. Like she said, it's not an it, it's a he. We could probably say she. I don't think she was making a gender statement. But her point was to think of the Holy Spirit. I think she wasn't saying think of it. I think she was saying the Holy Spirit is a personified actor in the same way that Jesus, in the same way is a living being, right? Yes. And so that was a sort of a neat little challenging thing. I thought the guy talking about the running club was also fascinating because he was really talking about it being they had one purpose. Yeah. So, but then again, I'm like, well, I don't know. That's interesting. Should the church have one focus, one purpose? So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, everything you all said, but for me, my worship experience was, my first time being in an assembly in 6 years, a disciple gathering in 6 years, and I was sitting with you all for worship. Or I know, we were all sitting in the same row, and Andrew Moran, who is, just a headliner in the disciples world for music. Written a lot of music in our songbooks and things like that. I've heard her sing a million times since I was a kid, and for something about her just walking onto stage, just with a guitar in her hand and not even getting to the microphone yet, just brought me to tears. And it was because it's this reminder to me that I'm not doing this work alone, that Chalice isn't doing this work alone, that we are a big family of diversity, a big family of diverse locations, a big family of diverse people. And we get together, we share communion, we sing songs, and we talk about really tough issues. And we don't have someone coming out in front of us telling us, this is how you're to believe today. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow I'll tell you something different.
Mm-hmm. Or thou shalt.
Thou shalt. Yeah. No, it's a we. We are guiding this with God. God is guiding us. We are walking alongside of God. That's why we call ourselves a movement. Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about everything. I think, we could talk a little longer about the Moral March, which happened on a Monday.
I want Jim to talk a little bit about that. Yeah. You did that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think you're transitioning sort of the overall vibe. Yeah. So for me, in the overall vibe, I think there were two sort of bookends, and one of them was the Moral March, where we saw Reverend Dr. William Barber speak. And Laura Tapia, who has connections to Chalice, also was speaking.
She lives in Chandler.
And she lives in Chandler. And so, and it was very exciting and very motivating. One of the things that came out of it, though, he was like, this isn't speaking truth to power.
Right.
Don't you think that you come here and this is speaking truth to power?
Right.
And he basically was like, yeah, you're going to cosplay as an activist while you're at General Assembly. That's fine. But there's work to be done. So when you go home, you talk to your senator, you write your representatives. When you go home, you speak truth. This is mass education.
Yeah.
So here I'm going to teach you what's happening. And here you're going to, and it was invigorating and exciting. And also it's like, yeah, challenge received. Like, yeah, that's for sure. And that was out in the heat and this, this mass of people and sort of chanting a little bit. And we had these coffins that we delivered to the senator's office, and they wouldn't let us in. And we moved around, and they kept going. And Lori and some other groups went over to the immigration court, and were making the presence known at the immigration court. And so that was sort of the high energy point.
Yeah.
And then I saw one of the things from worship was they did a tea ceremony.
Yeah.
And I found that to be so powerful about centeredness. One thing, it's nice too to raise up what Asian disciples are bringing to the table as well. The
100%.
Korean woman, I think that was fantastic for her to do that. And it was so much like, now I heat the cups up. Wait, room full of people, right? Like you all
Tell us
know,
to wait for a
right?
cup to warm
And as a
up.
teacher, right, you know that anxiety of like nobody's answering, so I need to call on them right now. We talk about that, about how you have to wait and all that. Just absolute serenity.
Yeah.
And then she dumped them out, and then I poured the tea. Wait, and it was just like, it was so. I found that to be so powerful, and those things together to me is like, that's what's amazing about General Assembly is you really see these extremes of development and of motivation and of faithfulness and spirituality. It was really cool.
Yeah, I was at the Moral Monday March, and it was very powerful because it was a call to action, not just a, here we are, we're gathered together. It was, no, like, that's cute and fun. Take it home.
Yeah.
Take it home and do this at home.
I think on the active part is really the thing that struck me as well. We sat in our hotel room on Sunday and listened to several sermons online.
Yeah.
And one was Dr. Barber, and there was he had a statement that really caught my attention when he was talking about Harriet Tubman leading slaves to freedom. And he said she didn't have Facebook. She didn't have TikTok. She didn't have even a newspaper or radio or anything like that. But she did have a 38 in her pocket.
Yes, she did.
And she did say, follow me, and we're going either to Canada or to heaven. Which one is the determination of we're being active and doing something. And the other one is having the faith that what your actions are going to produce a positive
That's right.
situation. So I thought the sermon and the whole assembly kind of brought me to that fact of you have to do something if you want something to get done.
Absolutely. Well, I'm grateful that y'all all came to assembly. I'm glad that out of our small little church, there were 4 of us there. And I know that there were churches that have, my home church, which has, last time I checked, about 1,500 members. One of the pastors out of 4 was there, and I saw 2 church members there. So we did and they all, hey, sorry, Beargrass, you're only a 6-hour drive. We had to fly. Get up.
We are on the front lines.
Yes.
I mean, in
Especially
Arizona,
on
we
the
are
Arizona
on the front lines of
the border.
evil that is happening. Yeah, I mean, we're right, literally on the front lines, like literally on the border of where the wickedness is transpiring. And so I think for us, when you talk about, this church, many of us publish something to say we support women's right to choose because we're in a state where we see women under attack. And we see the autonomy of their bodies under attack. We are, we have said statements about immigration. We resettled immigrant families for a long time, and we've said, this is when we go to these conferences and say, like, we see firsthand, this is where it's happening. This is where people are being taken. We heard last Sunday, Bob and Marilyn said, they knew somebody who was detained, like literally, and so a citizen who was detained for over an hour by the cops because he talked with an accent, right? Like, so when yeah, a pat on our back for showing up, but also I think that we have things at stake here that makes sense why you would see such activity from Arizona.
That's right. And for such a small region that we are, I mean, we were the Arizona Disciples Border Initiative was the focus of Week of Compassion Meal. On what we had workshops talking about border issues. Arizona really is, for our denomination, on the front lines of what is happening on the border in La Frontera. So I'm really grateful for y'all and all the work that you all do for not only for Chalice, but for the general and regional church. I'm thankful for the ways that y'all show up and speak your faith and for talking today to the podcast. And so thank you all so very much for being here. And we will see you all next time.
All right. Thanks, Jay.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks.
Thank you.